Please put your hands together for our next speaker, Maddie Parker, Mayor of the City of Fort Worth, Texas, as she unveils servant leadership in the Fishbowl.
Good afternoon. How is everybody? Yes? Having a good day so far, so good? Hi, Mary Louise. I see friends in the audience. That'll be fun as I pick you out. So my friend Ron said, I want you to speak to my group. I said, yes. What is the topic? And he said, servant leadership in a fishbowl, which I think any of you probably in this room could give a speech about that topic. And I think it's really just a nice way of telling people, tell us what it's like to be mayor, especially in this crazy, chaotic time to be in politics. So today's remarks, I'll go off script, I'll go back on script, is my attempt to give you my perspective as a mayor of the fastest growing city in the country right now, which is Fort Worth, Texas, nearing 1 million people. I was elected in 2021 of June 2021, and my successor had been, my predecessor was in office for 10 years, Mayor Price, and I served as her chief of staff for a lot of her tenure as mayor. And so I had big shoes to fill, or a lot of reasons why I ran, which I may or may not get into today. But essentially, it's a weird time to be in politics for all the reasons that we'll discuss. The truth is, when I think about servant leadership, I really go backwards into my childhood and the value systems that I was really raised on. I grew up in a really small town called Hico, Texas. Probably no Hiconians in the room today. I graduated with a whopping 42 people in my graduating class. I've told this story many times, but I grew up on a county road in between Glen Rose and Hico, about 15 minutes outside of town, 2 miles down a dirt road with a party line, which essentially means, for those of you who don't know, you share a phone line with your neighbors. And so my big gift at the age of 15 was an extra long phone cord so I could drag it into my bedroom to be somewhat anonymous on the phone. Very different time. And I graduated and went on to UT Austin, where I sort of got my first start in politics. But being around servant leaders was who I was as a child. My grandfather was actually the high school principal and a wannabe farmer. He would tell you that before he passed away, and a veteran of World War II from the U.S. Army. My father was a defense attorney who got sober and decided to go back to seminary and became a Methodist preacher. He would tell you that being a preacher is pretty much the same thing as being a defense attorney, for all the reasons you can probably attest to. When I got to Austin, I didn't know what I wanted to be or which direction I was headed. I just knew I was really happy to be anonymous for the first time in my life to be at UT Austin. I had the privilege of entertaining the world of politics at a young age. My junior year of college, I ended up with an internship for Speaker Tom Craddock in Austin, and then went on to continue working for elected leaders like Congresswoman Kay Granger, Senator Phil King, Mayor Price, and others. All good examples of what I think is true servant leadership. And we probably need more of that today. When I had to make the decision to run for mayor, I candidly didn't know I wanted to be in elected office. So it was June of 2021 when I was elected, but back up a little bit. The day I needed to decide to file or not file was January 6th. And the whole country was in upheaval, right? And the reason I ran is still the thing I talk about today, and I think it pertains to the topic of servant leadership, which is partisanship on extreme ends of both sides of the political spectrum are trying to destroy the country. And I believe so heartily in local government. I know you all do too, because you wouldn't be here in this conference if you didn't. You've given your careers and professional lives to this field. And I wanted to be the type of mayor that brought people together, that builds consensus, and is focused on solutions and not problems that divide us. And I do feel like in this country, the cities that will be most successful are those that truly understand what it means to be servant leaders into the future. It is not uncommon for me to get the question, how do you do it all? And I think there was a movie that Sarah Jessica Parker started at one point. I think if you watch the movie, essentially it tells you no one does it all, right? I'm a mother of 3 children. My youngest is 7 in 2nd grade. I have a 13-year-old that comes with all of that. And then a 22-year-old, our daughter's adopted. She joined our family when she was 10. That's the stretch between the kids. I have an awesome husband who has a very busy career as well. And oh, by the way, I'm not a full-time mayor. I work part-time as a chief of staff for the CEO of Cook Children's Medical Center in Fort Worth. I drove a lot of balls in the air. But I think each of you can probably relate that there are just certain balls you don't drop. There are certain balls that are glass that can't afford to be shattered. And for me, it's my family. And so I mention this to you today because even though you may not hold elected office, I know how hard each of your jobs are. Regardless of which department you work in, how long you've been there, you get pulled in a lot of directions. And raise your hand if you've been accosted by a member of your wonderful public, right? If the demands are so high on what you should be doing in your role that it can feel, honestly, just deafening, right? It can feel like the whole world is coming down on you, and it's really hard to separate professional and personal. So just a reminder of what you already know, there are balls you can't drop that are glass, and you cannot drop them, and you have to remember your family comes first. You have to create some level of balance as much as possible. Just today, thanks to my amazing team, I got to go to All Saints Episcopal, my 7-year-old goes to school, and have lunch with him at 10:50 before I got to come to a lunch meeting and then come to Dallas. I wouldn't have been able to do that if I didn't have 2 wonderful police officers that drive really fast to get me to and from locations. But I mention that to encourage you of sometimes your life, your role in public service needs to take a pause, and you need to take care of yourself and fill your own cup. And sometimes that's just having lunch with a 2nd grader who promptly spilled yogurt all over his khaki pants that you had just washed that morning. This first of the year, new year, my cousin, who's like my best friend, lives in Austin, who ironically works for a state senator. We're both in public service. She's into all the things. She's into the journaling and, expressing yourself and, drawing. I'm not into all that. And so I said, I'm not going to journal with you this year. I failed it like 3 times. I think you understand I'm not going to do that. I said, but I will do the pick your word of the year. You ever done that before? What is your New Year's resolution word? And my word this year is purpose. So think about that for a second, what your word would be. Some people want to create 2 different words, one for their professional lives and one's for personal, but mine translated to both as purpose. And I think, honestly, that this word, purpose, can be transferred to what Fort Worth, and frankly, what each of your communities across the country should be focused on. In Fort Worth, we are the fastest growing city in the country right now. Everything that we do, the actions we take in every single department in city government must have purpose and clarity of direction. Not just today and tomorrow, but truthfully, what will our city look like in the next 50 years? And in no disrespect to some of our elected leaders, the ones running for president, I will actually hopefully be living with the decisions that I am making as a 40-year-old mother of 3 kids in my city. And I do think it separates the way you make your decisions. You know that your community, the things you're doing as a leader, and importantly, the actions you're asking of your city staff will be things that your family will maybe benefit from or suffer from in the next 50 years. I think about the growth and development of Fort Worth, and I'll give you one very prime example. We started working on this when Mayor Price was mayor, and we have wonderful city departments that started partnering with the Trust for Public Land and focused on what it would look like to preserve open space in the city of Fort Worth. The why is very simple. We lose 50 acres per week in the city of Fort Worth to development. 50 acres. We're a city that is only half developed, which is a huge opportunity, but also it'll take your breath away. Because if you don't have a game plan, if you're losing 50 acres a week at a clip, your city is gone in a short few years. The place that all of us love, our tree canopy, our trails, our parks, all of it has to have intention and purpose to be preserved. So in line with my word of the year, we launched Good Natured, which really simply is just a new nonprofit conservancy effort focused to bring the private sector to the table to help encourage the policy decisions the city of Fort Worth will make in the next 10, 20, 30, 50 years around the acquisition of open space. Our goals are attainable. In the first 5 years, we hope to preserve, acquire at least 10,000 acres in the city of Fort Worth and maintain it for parks, green space, open space. We are partnered with our local water district, the Tarrant Regional Water District, in an important MOU. And I mention this to you because each of you come from a diverse subset of communities across the country. You may be facing different challenges than the city, but I encourage you to think about what makes your city special. And I promise you, it will all come back to some quality of place, right? Our cities and communities are places. They're people that live there for a specific reason. Identify what those reasons are and encourage you to make sure you're not paving paradise, whatever your paradise may be. In the city of Fort Worth, I also believe strongly that purpose is getting tested right now. What it means to be a servant leader is being tested right now. It's hard for each of you probably to name a good example of someone that holds elected office that doesn't embarrass you on the latest late night talk show or CNN or Fox News. Anybody ever just for fun trade cable channels within the first 1 hour and just trade back and forth? It's as if you live on 3 different planets based on what cable network you've decided to watch. I mention that because I really do worry about the cities across our nation that will be tested, especially this spring. I know that this presidential election will be incredibly hard. Many of you may come from families it's torn apart. And I encourage you to dig deep because I think it will be worse in the spring of 2024 and certainly into November. So if this is the reality we're facing in the United States in the next several months, I choose to be glass half full and not glass half empty. And I mention this out of a true signal of warning, but encouragement of how each of us in our respective communities can demand different and can really think about the importance of servant leadership. You need leaders who are willing to reach across the aisle and think about people over party first. You need individuals who will speak truth to power and be willing to make tough decisions focused on good policy for your communities, not about the thing that gets you on local news the fastest. Just this past week, I was in Washington, D.C. for U.S. Conference of Mayors. By the way, I'm always encouraged to come home as quickly as possible. Not because I hate D.C., I think it's a neat city. Morally, because I'm around a lot of mayors who are talking about their problems in their respective cities, and I'm always really happy to come home to the city of Fort Worth. But we're all tackling similar problems together. Everything from public safety to homelessness, property taxes, all of these issues that are facing large cities across America. But it is especially ironic to me when you're sitting in a room of mayors who are focused on solutions and moving their cities forward and what has worked in the last year, what hasn't worked, and you are blocks away from the U.S. Capitol, who is deadlocked in bitter partisanship and continuing resolutions and whether the government will shut down. Raise your hand if you get to shut down the city because you didn't pass a budget, right? It just doesn't work that way at a local level. And thank God it doesn't. We are not rewarded for being partisan. We are rewarded for getting things done. Imagine that. I think what helps me be an effective mayor is being someone that is truly open-minded. And I hope principled and willing to stand up for the things that really stand in my values and where I think the city of Fort Worth should be. And importantly, willingness to listen to our constituents, our residents in the city of Fort Worth, work alongside my colleagues to serve them the best way possible. I truly believe that my 10 colleagues on council prioritize good government and policy making over partisanship. We're all there to be servant leaders in the fishbowl together, which can be exhausting. And like the residents that they represent, our council members are wide-ranging in age and race and gender, profession, ethnic background, and political affiliation. The strength of our council actually lies in those differences. And I think if my council colleagues were here today and you could quiz them offline without me listening, they would tell you I spend an inordinate amount of time maybe playing referee. I call it herding the cats some days, but really encouraging a level of civility and putting down their swords as much as possible. And don't get me wrong, this isn't because I'm not steeped in a certain level of value system or the things that I believe are important in local government, that I don't carry with me a certain conservative value set that I think is driving a successful city in the city of Fort Worth. But it's because simply, I go home to 2 young children, one now that's old enough to Google his mom at any given moment. And the words that come out of my mouth are attached to the Parker family name. So I am acutely aware of the decisions, my words, my actions, and how they impact the next generation in my own family, our 2 youngest children. And I think that's important because candidly, there are not a lot of me in elected government in the country right now. I don't have to tell you that. The 2 men that will likely go head to head in the spring are 80 or 80 plus. They are not living with the decisions for the next 10, 20, 30, 50 years, but we are. So when Ron asked me to talk about servant leadership, I thought about the sacrifice that I go through, that each of you go through, but I also think about the reward and the potential. Because as someone that has sat in the same chair as you have, I loved being chief of staff at the city of Fort Worth. I thought it was an exciting job to be in the middle of all the action and all the drama, and importantly, the decisions on behalf of our city. And I hope each of you feel that same tenacity for your own jobs. Probably do, or you wouldn't be in this room at a conference to think about leading your own communities. But now is the time for those of us with cool heads and good ideas, and those of us that really care about building community rather than tearing each other apart, to focus on the power of servant leadership. Because I can promise you, our futures depend on it, and our children are watching. Thank you very much. I'll take questions. I think I can see if you have a question. I think there's mics passing around as well.
Is there a hand somewhere? Coming.
What has surprised you the most? You were under Mayor Price for a lot of years, but as mayor, what has surprised you most about this job for you?
So for me, I spent 17 years as a staff member in different levels of government. So I was always able to turn on and turn off pretty easily and hide. I'm a nerd. Like, I'm a policy wonk. I really like getting very deep on a topic. You can't do that as mayor, and I have to be an inch deep, mile wide on a lot of topics, which can be difficult for me. And I'm also not an extrovert at all. I'm a classic introvert extrovert. I have to have a turn off point. And I'm sure all of you have done that where you look at your week and you're like, I don't know how I'm going to do that. I got to talk to a lot of people. Right now it's rodeo season in Fort Worth. There are 3 weeks of rodeo, y'all. I got to be on a horse almost every night of the week. And it's tiring. And that surprised me. I thought I was ready for that, and I'd campaigned, right, for 6 months, which was, I've never been that tired in my whole life, just bone tired. But the job and candidly, what people deserve of you, so finding the balance, because the worst thing I can do is interact with someone and seem tired and put off and not listening to them. And so I've just had to create, as best I can, the boundary of what kind of fuels me. And I think that translates for each of you too. You know, how do you recharge your batteries to make sure you're best at work? So,
Thank you.
Thank you. Anybody else? Over here.
Hello, Mayor. We've met a couple of times
Hi
at
there.
different events, and I always admire so much your words because they're always a call to action. And so In my organization, we're exploring the topic of ethics in local government right now. And I'd like to ask you, as generally as you'd like to answer, how do you handle when the ethical decisions that you have to make in this type of environment, political environment, make it hard for you to interact intentionally with your citizens?
Yeah, it is hard, especially when your intentions, your ethics, your morals are questioned on a public stage because you did or did not agree with someone, right? And I do think that's playing out from a partisan perspective right now. If you're not a Democrat, you're not moral. If you're not a Republican, same thing, right? And that's so not true. Much of the world is united. It's the few things that divide us. I usually just follow my gut, and I don't know, there's not a more scientific way to say that, but I also have a great group of friends and advisors around me that I think can help me make good decisions and think about that. The thing that's hard about being mayor, and each of you, even if you're not in elected office, can attest to this, when you make a decision in local government, there's a domino effect. And so really calculating, especially for council votes, I'm one vote. I don't have veto power. So I want to get anything done, I have to bring my colleagues along with me. And from a partisan perspective, we're split down the middle. But you don't always see that play out because I try to spend the right amount of time with my council colleagues to see where they're coming from. But I'll be honest, I also stay off Facebook, which has become like a cesspool. I still like Instagram because I still see friends' babies, but and Twitter. I mean that candidly because the Twitter warriors, I think of them as people in their mom's basement, but they've got nothing better to do than question your morals and your ethics. And I have just found it is better to separate myself from the nonsense and focus on the people that I actually care about, with the residents of Fort Worth. So. We need awkward Jeopardy music.
Just one quick question, and probably not so much for Fort Worth, but smaller cities. I've come from a city in the Collier County outside of Chicago. We're about 22,000. We're very small compared to a lot. As much as we don't always love the media, the loss of local print media and coverage of what cities are doing. As an elected official, what does that give you concern? I know it gives me concern because we can put out our own story, but then if no one else is writing about us also, a lot of stuff gets lost.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. I think the demise of journalism coupled with the rise of social media is incredibly catastrophic for our politics, for our policy, and local government's usually the last one that's interesting, right, of what we're doing and working on. It's interesting in Fort Worth, we have a newer nonprofit digital news source called the Fort Worth Report that was started by a few different business leaders that wanted, to kind of answer the call on where was local journalism headed. Because our local paper, the Star Telegram, and we've got some great local reporters that try, but they're corporately owned and it's very different. And then, as you also know, especially if you're next to Chicago, I'm sure you could be covering a story that's really exciting. You're going to have every camera there, and then something happens and they're not going to show up, and it's the next day. I don't know what the future looks like with that, but I still think cities have a responsibility to try and over-communicate. There are some good examples. Anybody from Arlington here? Yeah? So Arlington, they've got some good examples on social media and their communications department that several years ago really took off and were more successful on getting engagement. I'm sorry, but we're going to have to meet the need somehow. And I, as much as I just dogged on social media and TikTok and Facebook, that's where people are. So how does a city really meet that need is a growing question. So that's our comms departments have to come up with some really creative ideas to meet residents' needs. It is hard, for sure.
Mayor, we have a question over here.
I was wondering how your work with nonprofit has influenced your sort of heart and soul as a mayor.
So significantly, I was really fortunate when I left Betsy's office. I founded a nonprofit called the Tarrant 2 and 3 Partnership, or T3. We started it from scratch, and COVID hit, and we had to raise $4 million on Zoom. And I started a business, I had a payroll, I had to fund HR, it was the whole thing. So number one is your nonprofits are businesses, right? They may not be capital driven, they are purpose driven, but they are businesses. Number two, in Fort Worth and Tarrant County, we are incredibly fortunate to have some of the very best nonprofits in the country, and their partnership work with the city is vital. Let's take just one example of homelessness, for instance. The work we're doing to combat homelessness would never be successful without really careful partnership from philanthropy and nonprofit. And lastly, the business of city government is really much closer to nonprofits as purpose-driven than any for-profit business in your community. And in my experience, the more work I can do with our nonprofit community, with their clients, with their missions, the better I understand how people in my community may be hurting or have needs that maybe the city's not the right fit to be leading, but we at least need to be knowledgeable and partner wherever possible in the nonprofit space. We're good? Okay. Thank y'all very much. Appreciate it.